Hey guys, thanks for clicking. So I'm gonna try something new and exciting. I'm gonna start doing book reviews, maybe movie reviews too. You never know what the future might bring. Uh, why am I doing this? Well, I'm glad you asked. I want to basically get a bunch of followers, a bunch of subscribers. I want to get the page monetized. I'm gonna have it littered, infested with ads. It's gonna be disgusting, and I'm gonna get disgustingly rich. Millions of dollars. I'm gonna be just rolling around in dollar bills. And I'll be posting this from my Malibu beach house in about a year's time. That's the plan. The future starts now. If that doesn't work out, well, at least it'll pass the time. I live in Connecticut, so what else am I doing? So for our maiden voyage, this probably isn't going to be very good because it's my first try. Be gentle, but hopefully they'll get better. I'm going to start with this book. Drum roll. Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I heard about this book, I think originally because it was an Amazon miniseries. I watched about 20 minutes of it. And this book has like 80,000 reviews on Amazon. So, massive runaway success. And it deals with 70's rock and roll, a fictionalized rock band from the 70's, and I'm into that. So I thought, I'll read this book, maybe it'll be up my alley. It's sort of been hyped as a kind of fictionalized version of Fleetwood Mac, which I have to say I think is a little misleading. There are certain similarities. It says this band, the Six, started out as a heavy blues rock band in the early 70's, and then they morphed into, the band, like more of a pop and soft rock band. Well, that is what happened with Fleetwood Mac. They started out as a heavy blues band. Peter Green was kind of their original leader. They had songs like Oh Well and Green Manalishi, which was covered by none other than Judas Priest, and then they kind of morphed into the Fleetwood Mac we know and love. I'm guessing probably the last time you were in a dentist office and you were in the waiting room, you probably heard, Landslide or Rhiannon or Dreams. And also there's a female keyboard player, and that's kind of like Christine McVie. Also, there's a female singer, and it says that she is mysterious and beautiful and blonde, and she has a great voice and kind of raspy sounding. So I think we're obviously a little bit of a stand-in for Stevie Nicks. But there's a lot of differences too. I think which outweigh the similarities. The story of Fleetwood Mac was one of the great rock soap operas of all time. When Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joined the band, they were already a recording duo and they were already a real life couple. So then they recorded Fleetwood Mac's first album, and then they broke up. That is, Stevie and Lindsey broke up their relationship, and then they went and recorded Rumors, their biggest album. I think still one of the biggest selling albums of all time. And they started kind of like writing little diss tracks to each other while in the same band, singing harmony. So, like Lindsey Buckingham says in Go Your Own Way, packing up, shacking up's all you want to do. So, it sounds like he's, is he calling his ex a slut? And they're in the same band. Luckily, the message of that song has been softened over time. I think it was used as a car commercial a few years ago. Welcome to the 21st century. But meanwhile, Stevie is saying, thunder only happens when it's raining. Players only love you when they're playing. And rulers make bad lovers. Better put your kingdom up for sale. So this is great rock and roll soap opera drama here. And the rest is rock and roll history. Now, in this book, it's not that way. You have Daisy, and then you have Billy, who's kind of the singer, guitar player, songwriter, so kind of like a Lindsey Buckingham stand-in. And basically, spoiler, and this whole thing, these reviews I think are going to be spoiler-filled. They never date. They never hook up. They never break up because they never date. So what actually happens is Billy, the beginning of the book, is a perfectly respectable 70's rock and roll star. He's doing drugs like there's no tomorrow. He's drinking heavily. He's hooking up with groupies. Although I have to say, it's all described in kind of a, you know, family-oriented kind of way. I mean, this is a book. Now we're going to get into some of my complaints. This is a book about 70s rock and roll. Not a single TV is thrown out of a 10-story window. Every TV in this story is perfectly safe. Not a single hotel room is trashed. Come on, we can do better than that. But at one point he is caught by his wife, you know, getting oral pleasure from a groupie on a tour bus. And then he says, oh, well, I'm going to reform. He gets sober, and he spends the rest of the book sober and monogamous. Now, this is great. This is a great sign of maturity. I admire this guy immensely for his restraint, his dedication to his wife and his 3 beautiful young daughters. But this is a novel about 70s rock and roll. I'm sorry, I just consider that unacceptable. It's a bridge too far. If you want to be sober, okay, but you can't be sober and monogamous at the same time. That, you know, Gene Simmons and Ted Nugent, the Motor City Madman, they claim that they've never done drugs or alcohol in their entire life. I'm not sure if I believe that, but that's what they claim. But then at the same breath, they'll say, but I also slept with 12,000 women, and that was just 1976. So you can't be both. It's just, you can't. That's what the 80s were for. That's why, you know, you had in the 80s, Aerosmith would go on MTV and they'd say, you know, Kurt, I love being sober. It's the best high in the world, man. It's a natural high. And then, you know, you'd say, well, but Steven, I'm listening to Dude Looks Like a Lady, and I'm thinking, this versus Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion. Have you ever considered maybe getting back into drugs? But anyway, but so I did find, like, come on, it's a little too, the rough edges of 70s rock and roll, which were debauched and slightly times even depraved times, because I've read a bunch of rock bios and such. It's a little too tame for my taste. So the story basically is Daisy is a little bit of a train wreck. She does a lot of drugs, and she goes from bad relationship to bad relationship. And she joins the band. She becomes the co-writer with Billy, and they start writing all these songs. And yeah, they develop a mutual attraction. There's a little bit of sexual tension, but nothing happens. And so it's kind of like a story, a little bit of kind of unrequited love, a little bit, because she kind of loves him, he sort of loves her, but nothing happens. So it's kind of like, it's like reading a Victorian novel, but again, if I haven't made this clear, this is 70s rock and roll. But so I'm drawing a blank. I think these kinds of stories where you can have a convincing story where you feel like the two people should get together and they don't, and that can be effective. But I think they both have to be lonely for that to work. I was thinking there was a movie from like 30 years ago, The Remains of the Day, and it was also based on a famous novel which I haven't read. And I think it was in the movie, it was Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson, and they have this sort of, they're friends and they have kind of a courtship, and you could tell they have feelings for each other, and they don't act on it. And it's very sad because they're both these lonely characters. And I think there was class distinction or something as well. But in this case, when you have Billy, who's happily married, he keeps telling us how much he loves and adores his wife, 3 daughters, they're not both. So how do you root for them? How do you root for Billy and Daisy to get together? Are you rooting for Daisy to be a homewrecker? Not really. So I didn't care. And but the other thing too is, well, then Billy's a great guy. We love him. But the problem is he's also kind of a jerk. He's a control freak. So he very reluctantly lets anyone else get involved in the songwriting and everything else. And even when he does, he then goes back and remixes the album without anyone knowing and just puts in his own parts and does what he wants. So it's not like he's even that great of a guy. So, and my other issue with it is, you don't feel like you get to know the characters all that well. With Daisy, what we know about her basically is most of the descriptions are just physical descriptions of how beautiful she is and her voice is great. But like, what's her background? She's from LA. She's rich, and we find out her parents didn't pay attention to her. That's about it. That's all we really know about her. And you have to know more about people. I think in books, to me, you have to earn the reader's interest, or you're not just gonna automatically care unless you give us something. Let us get to know them better. And I think the characterization is a little shallow. I think part of what holds it back, and it's an interesting technique, but there's no narrative in the book. It's all told through the perspective of people being interviewed, like it's a documentary. So it's kind of like the book version of Behind the Music, the old VH1 show. Taylor here is 40 years old, so she would have been probably old enough to remember that show. If you remember, great show. Every episode was pretty much the same. It'd be like, hey man, we got together, we got in a garage, we started writing songs, and we got some gigs, and then we got a record contract, it blew up, and we went on tour, we made millions, we started doing piles of cocaine, our manager robbed us blind, we went broke, we broke up, but now it's 12 years later, we're back in the studio, we're making new music again, we're all happy, we're all family men now, we're mature, and let me tell you, this is some of the best material we've ever made in our careers. The end, cut to credits, and then next week we'll be on to the same story. And that's kind of what this feels like. It's Behind the Music in print form. But I think it limits how well you can depict the characters. You need more of a background story. And maybe it's unfair comparison because I've read a bunch of bios of real rock stars, and you think of how some of those, a lot of times they do go into a lot. They start, the first quarter of the book, and they just talk about growing up and their childhood and everything else, and it helps explain sometimes what happened later. I remember reading Ozzy Osbourne's bio, and he talks about growing up in Birmingham, England, him and the other members of Black Sabbath, and he talked about this was an industrial town in the 60s, and basically everyone just worked in the factory, and it's like dirty, dangerous, monotonous kind of work. And Tony Iommi, the guitar player, even lost, I think, part of his finger in a machine when he was before Sabbath made it. And so you can lose appendages, and it's just miserable work. And everyone just kind of drinks themselves into the ground to kind of numb the pain. And so they say, well, for us, we realized we're blue collar kids. We're not going to Oxford. We're not going to Cambridge. It's either rock and roll or it's like death. It's roll over and die. It's just hanging out in Birmingham with factories and gray skies. And so that just, you hear something like that, and it just like it invites you into their lives more. And this book doesn't really do any of that. There's not much character development. It's shallower than a wading pool. So yeah, if you can't tell, I was a little disappointed in this book. It's fine, I guess, as a beach read kind of thing or whatever. It's not the worst thing you'll ever read, but maybe my standards are just high. And I don't know. But lots of people have read it, and it sold. She's probably kicking back right now in her Malibu beach house because she's probably raking in the dough from this book and her other books. A lot of people seem to love it. I read some reviews. A lot of people said similar things that I said in negative ways, but a lot of people say, well, this is a masterpiece. This book changed my life. I don't get it. Maybe the problem is me. I also a few little nitpicks. I'm being picky here. Again, these are nitpicks. But at one point, one of the characters says she had big brown eyes. I'm a sucker for brown eyes. Now, there's nothing. Brown-eyed women are beautiful, no question about that. Brown-eyed girl, I just asked Van Morrison. Brown-eyed women in red grenadine, asked the Grateful Dead. Love brown-eyed women myself, but it's kind of like saying, would you say I'm a sucker for brown hair? I mean, brown hair is the standard. I would think you'd say I'm a sucker for green eyes because it's rare, but I don't know. I'm being picky. Another thing I'm going to be probably even more picky about. At one point, she refers to microphones and calls them mics. Okay. M-I-K-E is how it's spelled. I think this is M-I-C. Open mic, M-I-C. Pass the Mic, the Beastie Boys song. I googled it to make sure. M-I-C. And if we can't trust the Beastie Boys on spelling and grammar, I don't know who we can trust. It is Mix Master Mike, M-I-K-E, but I think that's because his name is Michael. Maybe she thought if people see in print M-I-C, they're like, what's a Mick? and figured if we spell out Mike. But if you think your readers are that dumb, I mean, what are we doing? And also, there's also a scene early in the book where, now we're going to get into the point of the video. We're going to talk about nipples. You knew it was coming, right? They talk about how the band early on, they're wearing tight shirts, and one of the band members says to another dude, he says, "Hey man, I can see your nipples." This is a struggle for any writer to, write and speak the way the opposite sex would speak. I mean, male writers can struggle with this with female characters. I could be wrong, but I don't know that any guy has ever said that to another guy. I mean, part of it is, "Hey man, what are you doing looking at my nipples?" Like that kind of thing. And also, I mean, guys often walk around shirtless at the beach or mowing their lawn or whatever, whether you wanted to see them shirtless or not, there they are, shirtless. So is it really an event? Does it even matter if you can see their nipples through their t-shirt? Now, a girl, you could picture, of course, saying that to another girl. Now, of course, there is a movement, I'm going to go off on a tangent, I think it's called Free the Nipple, where some women believe it's unfair that women can't walk around topless and men can, so they have these demonstrations and such. It baffles me in 2024 that some guys are still not fully on board with feminism. I don't get it. Obviously, it's a major development for civilization. Wake up, guys. And also, there's quite a bit made of Daisy and the fact that she doesn't like to wear bras. They do practically a whole chapter to their album cover where she's wearing a tank top and you can see her nipples, and that's the album cover. So it's funny, if this was a male author, they would be like, this is objectifying and all this stuff. But I don't know. So also, I found it's a little too much. There's a lot of great books written by women. So I'm just going to say it, but some of my best friends are female authors. Sorry, I don't know anyone, but I've read great books by women. I'm not saying, but there's a definite distinct chick lit aspect, if I can say that, to this whole story. Again, it's like the Wild West world of 70's rock is getting a little bit extreme makeover, chick lit makeover, and you get a lot of like relationshipy type advice stuff, which I'm gonna read you something, if I may. We're about done here, but I want to read you one thing, and you can judge. I mean, whether you might think this is brilliant, but one of the characters, actually, it's Billy's wife Camilla, says this: "All I will say is that you show up for your friends on their hardest days, and you hold their hand through the roughest parts. Life is about who is holding your hand, and I think whose hand you commit to holding." Now, do I disagree with that? No, I mean, all right, I'm on board. It's a little too. Again, maybe I wasn't the target audience for this book. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's my fault. Yeah. Well, I think to get this out of my system, I'm probably gonna take my TV and throw it out the window. I mean, somebody's got to. Nobody did in this book. If they're gonna drop the ball like that, I gotta pick up the slack, I guess. So my next video, I think we're gonna shift gears. I'm thinking of doing a review of Chuck Palahniuk, Fight Club. Famous for the movie adaptation. I've read a couple of his other books, never read this one. First rule of Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club, but I think we are allowed to talk about Fight Club, the 1996 novel, so that's what we're gonna do. So in the meantime, thanks so much for listening to me drone on, and I hope you enjoyed it. And do me a favor, like and subscribe, because my Malibu beach house isn't going to pay for itself. Thanks.